All right, we are recording, so there we go. All right, I'm going to get started. Um, what I did this morning was I went back in and I looked at your syllabus, and there's some stuff in here. I wish I'd done a better job with the dates. The only thing you have due right now, literally for Sunday, is chapter 1. All right, and then chapter 2, just chapter 2, isn't due till next week. And then chapter 3 is due the week after that. And then 4 and 5 are due the week after that. Well, that's kind of stupid just because of the fact that technically after next week, we're done with the first 5 chapters and we're still in, around the middle of January. So I want to change these dates. Now, just hear me out on everything if you would, please. This is what it's set up for right now. Chapter 1 is due, like I said, this weekend. But the only thing that there is in chapter 1, there are no labs, there is no homework. So that's moot. So the only thing that's actually due Sunday is the written test for chapter 1. Then next week, the stuff is for 2, the following week for 3, and the week after that for 4. I'd like to change that. And like I said, hear me out if you would, please. So I'd like to make this Sunday, I'd like to have 1 through 3 due. All right. And then by next week, next Sunday, have 4 and 5 due. Now, that's a lot to ask of you. So this is what I'd like to do. All right. When we take a look at what's in here, so I was going back and looking at the assignments. All right. And you see that we've got about 5, I think it is, assignments for chapters, okay, 3 through 4. Okay, so the only thing that really would be due, in 1 through 3 would be that one right there. So I'm asking you to do 1 right there. And then in the projects, all right, it would be these 3. All right. So what I would like to do, and again, if this is the way that I plan on doing it. All right. I mean, I'm supposed to be in charge. I know I'm not always in charge, but I'm supposed to be. So what I'd like to do is when you come in here tomorrow, I'd like us to build assignment 3-1 together. So you'll have that done. All right. And then go over and we can build 2-1 and 3-1 together. We'll do that tomorrow. Why am I doing this? Well, the main reason that I'm doing this is because this is the fundamental stuff. I want you to understand it. I don't expect that you're going to be just sitting there and waiting until I get done. So I'm not going to take these when I get done and put these out on a GitHub repo. I will do them in front of you, and what I will expect is that if you have, you will ask. But then all you'll really be responsible for if you keep up with me tomorrow is you'll have to do 2-2, which I think personally is pretty simple. All right. And then you'll have to finish up 2-1 and 3-1 any way you'd like. And then that'll be it. The rest of the stuff will all be done. All right. You'll still have to do, of course, the written tests for chapter 2 and for chapter 3. But that'll get us more in vogue, whatever you want to call it. All right. And next week, then you'll be responsible for these 4, but they're all parts of the same project. All right. So you'll be responsible for that from the case study, and from the projects, then you'll be responsible for these 2. Now I'm going to look at it this weekend, but what I'm leaning towards, just so you know, what I'm leaning towards doing right now is on Monday of next week. Friday's a lab, remember. On Monday, doing this one and doing that one with you, because it's very similar to the program that we're going to be looking at here in chapter 4. But what I'd like to do, and I'm going to do this over the weekend because I've not done one like this before, is I would like to go back and literally have us create the project from scratch. In other words, we'll do an empty project and we'll add everything by hand. That'll really give you the chance to see, excuse me, exactly what we have to do. Plus, if we do that, that'll mean then for next week, if you keep up with me on this, you'll have to do just 5 from here. And then from over here, like I said, you'll have to do these. But you'll have a lab day next week to work on them as well. All right. Now, I've done stuff in the past where I've changed assignments and we've done stuff. And I know at times people have gotten upset with me, maybe rightfully so. All right. But like I said, I'm trying to be fair here, but I don't want us where we're on chapter 9 and we're doing homework from chapter 3 or 4. To me, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. All right. Say it again one more time that what I plan on doing then is what I will do is tomorrow we will take a look at building this price quote app. We will also take a look at styling the price quote app. We will look at both of those tomorrow. That's the first thing that we will do. You will be responsible on your own for building the tip calculator app. And like I said, with that app, I don't think at least it's not very hard. Literally, you just set that stuff up. All right. It's almost the equivalent of a Windows Form project that we've done. All right. And then again, on the case study, all right, we'll do 3.1 and we'll set the homepage up together tomorrow. It's not a very big thing to do, but that should get you started. All right. And then next week, like I said, you'll be responsible for 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 4.4 from here. And then from here, all you'll be responsible for is the debug exercise. And I've got to make sure if you don't have that, they give you a program that's broken and they ask you to fix it. It's the tip calculator, and it wasn't really all that difficult. So that's the way I plan on doing this to get us back. So what I'm saying too is I'm going to go back to the syllabus and readjust all the dates that are in there. And I'm not trying to be unfair to anybody. It's just the opposite. I'm trying to make sure that the homework pretty much stays in lockstep with where we are. So I'll go over those tomorrow. Like I said, then on Monday, all right, we'll go through this one right here, build the contact manager app. If we have any extra time on Monday, it'll be lab. I haven't built that yet, so I don't know how long it'll take. I mean, I've got the answers from the book. That's that for me doing that's as bad as just giving the stuff to you. I don't want to do that. So I want to build it, make it look my own way, put my own stamp on it, so to speak. All right. Then on Tuesday of next week, on Tuesday, I'm going to give you your first test. It will be on chapters 1 through 5. And again, there's really not going to be anything through chapter 5 that's in there. I'm not going to ask you to set breakpoints or watches or anything like that. So really, it'll be on 1 through 4. And we're going to be going through chapter 4 right now. All right. Now, if any of you have a real big problem with that, I'd appreciate it. Just send me an email and say, hey, that's unfair or whatever. You're more than entitled to do that. But I'm trying, like I said, to do it, and I'm trying to be fair in what I'm doing. All right. But I think that by doing a bunch of this stuff together, that when we start getting into chapter 6, and that's when we're going to start putting some routes in here and some other stuff, it'll make it much easier for you to understand what's going on, because I think at least you're going to have a much better foundation that you'll be building on. So like I said, that's what I plan on doing. All right. So with that said, I'm going to jump right into, and I will update the syllabus after class today to make it look like this. All right. And I will send out an email so those people who are not watching this right now, you will be able to know exactly what I just said in class. If somebody doesn't watch all of the tape or doesn't understand the tape. So I'm going to jump right into chapter 4 here. There's a lot of new stuff in here. There's a lot of stuff in here that we've gone over already. All right. What they do in here is some of the stuff that we did when we did our movie quotes program. All right. We set it up in such a way that, like with a connection string, I didn't even set one up. I let the system set everything up. That's not usually the way that it's done. But what I wanted to show you was how we could create a fairly simplistic one-page app and connect it to a database without doing a boatload of work. Now, you may or may not agree, but I think I succeeded in that. All right. To my knowledge, all of you now were able to go in and connect using the Entity Framework core. You were able to connect to your database and display your information on screen right from the database. All right. And I did put that out there yesterday. The fact that I put my working project out there. So if you had any problems, all right, hopefully you'll be able to work on it. Now, when we're doing this stuff, it's going to be imperative isn't even the right word. It's going to be mandatory that when we create something, I'm going to have to tell you exactly if it's an assignment or whatever, or if it's a test or whatever, exactly what to call it. Because if you call your database something different than I call my database, or you call your tables, etc., if you start doing that, it's going to be a really, pardon my French, but a pain in the ass for me to try to grade your work. All right. So, like I said, we're going to hopefully do the best we can to keep in step with one another. So, chapter 4 is how to develop a data-driven MVC app. As it says, we built a multi-page data-driven, which means it's going to be using a database. As it says, it displays the data stored in the database and allows you to add, update, and delete data. Even more so than that, in that last sentence there, it's going to allow us to work with 2 tables at the same time. And the way they're going to do this is they're going to, let's just take a quick look right here. We're going to be working on this movie app right here, okay? And if you look in here, it's got a name. Each movie has a name, a year, a genre, and a rating, okay? Now, what's going to be different in this example from the one we did the other day is the genre itself is not actually stored directly in this table, all right? Rather, what's going to happen is a reference to the genre is going to be stored in this table, and the genres are going to be stored in their own table. Now, think about why that would be the case. If you had 100,000 movies in there, would you really want to say drama in there, 20,000 times if you didn't have to? All right, really, it would be better to have a number or a letter or something that would basically, like a D for drama, an R for rom-com, an A for action, etc. That's what you're going to see towards the middle of the chapter. All right, so we're going to go rather into that. All right, so we get a quick little introduction, then how to use EF Core. Some of this stuff we've done, some of this is different than what we've done. All right, they explain the DB context class in much, much, much more depth and breadth of coverage than I did in the last couple periods. They talk about seeding the database. And what that means is when you build the database via your migration, it already has some records in it. Then they talk about using connection strings. From there to dependency injection. And when you first hear that, dependency injection seems to have kind of a bad connotation to it. But dependency injection rather is actually a good thing. All right. Then they go into migrations. You'll notice it's only a couple pages, and it pretty much is most of the stuff we've talked about. All right. Then they talk about how to select and how to work with data. But what they're going to get into in here is the usage of link. All right. And exactly what you do to make certain things happen. All right. What does that mean? Well, when we went in there and we chose, if you remember, What was it? I think it was the controller. I don't even remember. But when we chose it to have EF, the actions for us, a lot of that code was built in. Here they're going to explain exactly what's happening in those different statements. And I think it's really important that you see this and that you understand it. Then they'll go in, as you can see in there, all the home controller basically is responsible for in this program is showing a list of all movies. And that's what comes up when you start running the program. Then in the movie controller, that's basically responsible for your CRUD. All right, your edit, your delete, your your update, etc. Then towards the end of the chapter, in the last 10 to 15 pages, that's where they bring in another table. All right. Now the good news is at least conceptually, you should be able to understand what they're doing here. And what I mean is they talk about things like foreign keys, which we've talked about before. They talk about primary keys, which we've talked about before. But when we've done them in the past, that's been when we've created our own database. Here, we're not doing that as much as via these migrations, we're having that stuff created for us. So not only do they do a migration in here, they do at least a couple of migrations. And in that second migration, what they do is two things. First, they go in and they add a new table. All right, and that's the genre table. And then next, they go back and they go into the records that are in that table, in the movies table, and they add the genre to them. And if you don't understand what I'm saying, I'm giving you the high level overview. We're going to hit on all this stuff. All right. Then again, there'll be a lot of stuff that's in here on these pages that's going to talk about link. All right. And I'm still not sure. So what I want to do is, like I'm going to do exactly what I told you. I'm going to talk about chapter 4 today. All right. Tomorrow I'm going to go over those examples that I talked to you about. All right. Monday we're going to do the 1-4. But as we're doing that on Monday, I want to get your feedback and I want to say, hey, do you understand this stuff well enough to be taking a test on this tomorrow? And if the overriding opinion is, no, I don't, then maybe we will go through and on Tuesday do yet another project. I don't know. All right. But to me, chapters 1 through 5 are the fundamental foundation of what we're doing. And if we don't have a good understanding of chapters 1 to 5, it's going to get nothing but harder from then on. So in chapters, I don't want to run on to chapter 6, is what I'm saying. All right. Finally, the chapter ends in the last 4 pages where they come in and they allow you to create what are referred to as user-friendly URLs. Well, one thing about URLs is typically, as it says right there, they're all lowercase. And right now with what we've been doing, when I showed you how to go to home/index, etc., it expected the stuff to be in uppercase. All right. Finally, what we'll do is we'll talk about how to add a slug. And a slug is kind of taken from newspaper terminology, but it's a way that we can add extra information onto the end of a URL. All right, so that's, like I said, just kind of a high level overview of what we're talking about. We're going to do it the same way. All right, I'm not going to sit and build this. I did bring up, you've got this movie list, you've got it in your stuff that was sent to you at the beginning of the semester, but we will bring up the code later. I just went into the student download and the book apps, and I found the movie app, the chapter 4 movie app. So that's what we're going to be working on. All right. So as it says, it's where we worked on a movie quotes app. This is a movie list app. So it'll have, imagine for a second that this was something that maybe you were creating something for an actual video store or something like that. You'd want more stuff in here than this, but we could always come back in there and add a price, number in stock, etc. But this is what we're working with to begin with. Okay, so we've got all this stuff in there. Again, you'll notice this is our local host followed by some port number. All right, then this is our add movie page. So you'll notice we want name, we want year, we want genre, and we want rating. What's kind of neat, notice where it says there, select a genre. All right, what does that mean? Well, you'll see it when we go into this, but I believe it means we're going to have a drop-down list in here. All right. And then when you look here, notice it says movies add, and this one says, or movie ad, I should say. This one says movie edit 2. So it's letting us know that the second one that's in there, all right, and really, I don't think it is the second. I think it's the third. I think this actually starts with 1, but it doesn't matter that it's looking at Wonder Woman, and it has a delete capability as well. And you can see the buttons that are in there. So we're going to hit on all this stuff right now. All right. It's interesting too. I will tell you that if you say, if you know, we're working with SQL Server, we're working with C#. All right. I've been contacted recently by a graduate who said to me that he's been out looking for jobs, and that one of the jobs he went and interviewed for, one of the first things they asked him was, do you have SQL Server C# experience, where you're working with databases? All right. Well, now you will all be able to say, yes, I do. All right. Now I'm not going to, this is just the common sense stuff. It's what I mentioned to you. It says, if you click the add button, if you click the edit button, if you click the delete button, exactly what happens. All right. Each page, as it says, communicates with the database. Yep. That's exactly what we want. What we want in here. All right. As I'm going through this, I know sometimes I get off on tangents a little, or I talk fast, or I do whatever. If you want to slow me down, yell slow down. If I'm missing something or something doesn't make sense, please stop and ask me, please. I lectured yesterday for the first year people, and I had one person who asked about 3 questions, and he said, kind of, I'm sorry for, and I'm like, don't apologize. I'd much rather have this be interactive. All right. So it says, before you learn the details, you should learn a little more about the structure. This is one of the reasons I went over the example that we went over the other day, because it's what they're going to do is they're going to explain what's in the models folder, what's in the views folder, what's in the controllers folder. All right. And then they're even going to talk about migrations, but again, they talk about it later on in here. All right. So this shouldn't look all that new to you. All right. If you take a look in here, what do we have? Right. We've got our www root. We've got our controllers. We've got our models. We've got our views, and the majority of the stuff that's in there, the majority of it is all stuff we've looked at before. You will notice if you look in models that now there's 3 models. Technically there's 2. One is the context, but there's a genre model and there's a movie model. So again, we're going to have the ability to use more than one table in here, and to actually be able to combine the informations from the 2 tables. All right. So this should be review, these first 4 things, but you should understand what a model is by now. You should understand what a view is by now. You should understand what a controller is by now. You should even understand what migrations are. All right. We haven't gone over the seeding part, but we've actually performed a migration. All right. What we have not really talked about in on this page are these 2 things at the bottom of the page: appsettings.json and program.cs. The appsettings.json, as it says, it stores static configuration settings. Static meaning non-changing. All right. Things like database connection strings, which you'll see momentarily. All right. The program.cs file, we did talk about that a little. That's what runs when the program starts. And basically it does all the work configuring stuff behind the scenes, for lack of better words. All right. All right. So, like I said, we're going to go through this. This is 7 or 8 pages, something like that. How to use EF Core. What you're going to find is some of the stuff that's in here I've already talked about with you. Some of the stuff that's in here will be brand new. All right. I did mention the other day that EF Core is an ORM, or object relational mapping framework. All right. As it says, it allows you to work with objects of a database in code. When we go in there and we set up our class, basically those class properties that we are setting up become the table fields. All right. All right. I think I mentioned this to you yesterday, but what they're saying here is prior to .NET Core 3.0, EF Core was included by default. All right. But starting with EF Core, they changed it so you must manually add it. And I believe the reason for that is because there were a lot of places that were creating apps with this that weren't using databases. And there was a lot of overhead from all the code that was being added that they weren't using. All right. So it says there are many different versions of the entity framework. This means you need to make sure to select the right NuGet package. All right. It says, for example, and they go through an example that's in here, but we're going to look at that momentarily. All right. Now, believe it or not, we sort of looked at this the other day. And I want to bring this up exactly the way they're showing it in here right now. So I just brought up, what did I bring up? I don't want that. I'm going to bring up, let's see, the one that we were working on the other day. So let's see. Oh, we'll just, this is the one from the book. So we'll bring this up. This is the movie list. Again, this isn't mine, not claiming that it is. This is the one from right out of the book. All right, I'll give it a second to come up here. This is what they showed a little bit earlier, etc. And we're going to be talking about this one today. All right. Now they mention in here, it says you want tools, NuGet package manager. So I want to do that. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to choose tools, and I'm going to go down almost exactly halfway and choose NuGet package manager. All right. Now there's 3 things that are in here. There's the one that you probably will never touch, are package manager settings, the bottom one. All right. The package manager console is what we used. That brought that up down here where it says PM. There it is. We already did that. We already went through some of the stuff that you can do with that. All right. And I'm going to close that. But if I go and bring it up again and I go to tools and again go to NuGet package manager, and this time I choose the middle option, which is manage NuGet package for solution. This is what I mentioned to you the other day. This is sort of like the NPM, or the node package manager, all right, for ASP.NET. So if I come in here and I type something in, and they show some examples here, but if I come in and type in entity framework, it'll show me, unless I misspelled, which I could have, but it'll show me whatever it is that's in there, that I'm looking for. And when you bring this stuff in, you literally click on it and then notice what it says. What do you want to do with this? All right. And what we'll want to do is the project we'll want to work on is movie list. That's what this one is called. So we put it in there, and then there's different versions. All right. Typically you'll get up-to-date version. All right. But not always. And then you'll click install. All right. And there might be some other stuff that you have to do as well in here. So let's take a look at that. All right, so I just showed you how to open up the NuGet package manager, and I showed you what could be in there. All right, now this is important. It says click the browse link and type in the following. Well, that's a lot to type. So, I can just go in here and highlight all of it. And well, it's actually, the copy doesn't work. So I'm going to have to type that in. but let's go in and try that. So it's Microsoft.entityFramework. In fact, I'll put it in here. Microsoft.entity framework. I don't believe that it's case sensitive. Core.SQL server, just in case it is. Let's put it in the same way that they show it. So Microsoft Entity Framework, Core.SQL server. All right, and the other one that we're going to be asked to put in down here is Microsoft Entity Framework Core.tools. So I'm going to copy all that and come down here and put in .tools. All right, so I've got this here, and I'm going to go into, all right, and paste that in. You'll typically want to click in the browse window here because that has all the different stuff that's available. All right, where I was is literally what is installed. Well, you can see we've already got this installed and we've already got this installed. All right, but I'm going under the premise that we didn't have them installed. So I'm here, I'm coming in there, and I'm doing this. And you can see what it shows you. Virtually always when you do this, you're going to choose the top option. All right, so again, if I click on this, that's going to be the one that I'm going to choose. All right, now could it be one of the other ones? It's possible as you start looking through there. All right, now you might look there and go, wait a minute, well, yours isn't installed. Well, again, when I look under what's installed, it says it's there. All right, so I'm going to take for granted that it already has been installed. What I'm trying to show you is if we want to bring that in, what we have to do. So again, we'd have to come in here and click on that, and we'd have to choose the version that we're looking for. And you'll notice what's installed here is 3.1.0, and the latest version is 7.0.2. All right. It is totally possible and plausible that you could install a version that's either lower than you need or higher than you need. And they'll talk about that in just a couple seconds in the book. All right. So there's that one. And the other one is this, and it's .tools. And again, you can see that. All right. And you can see that that one is in there too. Okay. All right. So they show the installation, what's going to happen as it says when you do all that stuff and you click install, it'll come up and it'll basically say, hey, this is what you're about to do, and you'll click OK. With virtually all of these that we'll use, then it'll come up and it'll say, hey, basically they're trying to cover their own butts, and they're saying that you're going to be using this in the way that it's supposed to be used. So you click accept, and that's pretty much everything you have to do. All right. Okay. Now, next is that DB context class. So again, if we come in here Monday, this is, like I said, this is my plan, is we'll create this from scratch. So we'll put all of this code in ourselves. All right. That way you should really get an understanding of what's what when we build it that way. All right. What we've been doing so far and what we will continue to be doing is what's called EF code first. There is another EF, and I think it's called EF database first. It's just the opposite. With EF core first, you create your classes and then you create your code, your tables based off of your classes. With EF database first, you do it in the other direction. All right. So it says there that figure 4.4, which we're going to turn to in just a second, begins by presenting a table that describes 3 classes of EF core. The only one we've dealt with thus far has been DB context. And as we talked about in class, that's your primary mechanism for communicating with a database. There's also other things that you can put in there, such as, notice there's DB context options, configuring options for this. So if stuff has to be passed into it, you can pass it into DB context options. Then there's a DB set, a collection of objects created from the specified entity. Usually an entity is what's going to map into a table. All right. And if that makes no sense, just keep watching, please. All right. So there's going to be 2 or 3 code examples in here. The first code example, it says shows a DB context class named movie context. Notice it inherits from DB context, all right, which needs this. So when we go in and we look on here, there's that using statement, and this inherits from this. All right. And you might say, well, what's the difference between this and what we did? All right. Most of the stuff we did was automated, which works okay when you're doing very little work, which is what we did in the application that we did. But as your apps get more and more complex, you're going to be doing more and more of this coding yourselves. All right. And there's reasons for that. Let me give you a quick example of why that's important. And what I mean by that is when you are running your program and you bring up, you choose what you want to do on there, and you want to do an edit. As an example, you want to do an edit. Well, what's that designed to do? Well, if you remember yesterday, I had those 2 quotes in there, "Just Keep Swimming" by Dory and "Yo Adrian" by Rocky Balboa. So if for the Rocky Balboa, if you clicked edit, all right, it brought up a form that had all the fields for that Rocky quote filled into it. Okay, so it was an edit. On the other hand, when we clicked create a new quote, that hyperlink that was in there, it brought up the same form. The only difference is in the first case, we had to provide for it an ID. And in the second case, there's no ID. So what we'll be able to do is, and what you typically do, what we did was basically use the same form for both editing and for adding. All right. But then if we're going to do that, the system has to know, is this an edit or is this an add? Well, how does it know that? If it's an edit, we basically will have to pass it. We'll have to pass it along an ID. All right. And if it's an add, meaning we want to add a new one, either we pass in nothing, or maybe we even pass in an ID of 0. All right. And you'll see that again as we go on in here. All right. So again, this is an example of the movie context class. And it says here, this is the movie class with a property whose value is generated by the database. This doesn't look that different from what we did with just a couple of exceptions. All right. You could do this right now, where you could come in and right mouse click on models, choose movie, put in public int movie ID, get set in curly braces, then the same with name, then the same with year, then the same with rating. So what's new in here? Again, what they have done is they have done what's called decorating. All right. You'll notice for the name, there's 2 things that have changed here. First, they've got validation in there that it says it's a required field. If you don't put anything in at all, you'll get that message right there that says, please enter a name. This is what's known as a reference type. All right. And since it's a reference type, typically when you set it up like this, you give it a default value. that is the string.empty. So that's supposing we're starting with an empty string. And again, that's referred to as a reference type. The other two that are in here, those being the year and the rating, those are known as value types. And you'll notice if you look in here, all right, that they're both of type int, and they both also have a question mark by them. All right. And what that's going to mean is typically when you are doing this stuff like this, it'll be set up so that null values are not allowed. Leaving something blank is not allowed. All right. And if you try to do that, typically the program will break. Now, by putting that question mark in there, what you're basically saying is those two fields are null allowable. You'll still get the message if you don't put a year in there or you don't put a rating in there, etc. But there are times in here we're going to have to put in an exclamation point, or we're going to have to put in a question mark, and that's just because of the way the language is written. Now, one thing they did in here that I don't like, I would not have made my maximum year 29.99. All right. I mean, what is that? We're in 2023. That's like 970 years from now plus. All right. But what you probably don't want to do is put in here 2023. What you can do as an example is you can figure out by just basically making a call right here what the current year is. All right. And then you could use that, or maybe even the current year plus 5 or something like that. Sometimes movies are created and they're not going to come out for a few years yet. All right. But again, if you put in a value less than 1889 or a value that's greater than 29.99, you'll get that error message. Same thing below with the ratings. If one is less than 1 or greater than 5. All right. So this stuff is pretty much explained in here. I don't want to sit and read this stuff to you. All right. Again, they talk about primary key. You should have an idea right now what a primary key is. Okay. And what they say in here is by doing this, remember last time we wrote the name ID in there. You've got your choice. All right. There's 4 things that we could do right here. Okay. You'll notice when we did ours the other day, we wrote this public, int, and we wrote ID. We could have also written public, int, ID. That's totally legit. All right. And let's just imagine we're still quotes. We could have said public, int, quote, ID, or we could say public, int, quote, ID. All I'm trying to tell you here is if at the end of your field, it's either ID with a big I and a little d, or it's an ID with a big I and a big D, the system will recognize this as being a primary key, and it'll automatically make it an identity field. Again, meaning that it will start with a 1, and it'll be incremented by 1 by default. Now, there's going to be a few times in this chapter where the author is going to mention something kind of in passing, and then he'll turn around, but there'll be more in chapter 12. That's another reason I just want to get the foundation down so we can get in towards chapter 12, where a lot of the meat that's in here is going to be. All right. They mention it here again about some of the validations. I've already said that. All right. Let's see. Okay, the next thing that's new that we have not looked at is the seeding. Now, if you remember, what I did is I did not seed that database that we used for the movie quotes. Rather, once it appeared to be working, I clicked the create new movie quote option that was in there, or create new quote, whatever we called it, and I put the quote in myself. All right. What they're saying here is you can seed this. Now, is there a big advantage? I mean, well, everything, you only have to type it in once. I could put in 3 or 4 or whatever, but they also say this can be used with lookup data, like a list of states. So if I had that someplace else, I wouldn't want to be typing in 50 things. Or if I included like the Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, etc., maybe even 50 some. I wouldn't want to do that if I could help it. But here's an example where they say they're going to talk about this, but they say, hey, don't worry, you'll learn more about it in chapter 12. All right, so let's look at it and then we'll come back to this. All right. So we are in this method. This is where you do it. It's in a method called on model creating. And you'll notice you're using what's called a model builder object. All right. And we're using a method in there, a has data. Now, when you do this, you might say to yourself, wait a minute, you told us that with the ID that it's automatically making it an identity field starting at 1 and then going on, and that's true, except for seed data. When you add something in there that you seed, you must manually come in here and put in the IDs yourself. So this is putting the first 3 records into our table, and it is manually setting the ID to 1, 2, and 3. So if we did something like I did yesterday, where I came in and tried to bring in that entire file that had the 50 quotes in it, they would start with 4. All right, and that's what I'm telling you here. All right, so let's see. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. So it says here, this movie context, which again, it's a child of DB context, was updated to, all right? And I mean, you'll have to read this stuff. I don't know if there's a really there's no dainty way of putting all this stuff where it's going to totally make sense. All right. So, I've already mentioned this. They say when you insert your stuff about when you come in and don't seed, but you insert records, you don't have to put in an ID. But as it says, it doesn't apply to doing the seeding. All right. And they also mention in here that if you're searching online for this, again, there were massive changes made when they came to version 3. Okay. So that what they're saying is, and there's a heck of a lot of documentation out there, but what they're telling you is a lot of the documentation that's out there is old. All right. So if you look at documentation before version 3.0, it's going to hurt you and not help you. Now they set this up as an array of entity objects, and that's what's explained in here. All right. But it's fairly heavy. All right. It says it accepts a model builder object. It provides an entity method that returns an entity type builder, as it says. For instance, the one, if you pass in, if it's a type movie, it returns an entity type builder of a movie object. All right. This object, as it says, has the has data method that accepts an array of objects. And that's exactly what this is right here. It's an array of objects. All right. You can read this in here on your own. Again, I'm trying to be as complete as I can in here. This is definitely the heaviest chapter we've gone over thus far. All right. Let's do the connection string and then we'll take a break. Now, the connection string, this is interesting because it's got something in here that, and I have generated several connection strings over the years, but it has something in here that I have never used. I'm going to show it to you in a moment. But as it says, it's a string that specifies information that the app needs to connect to the database. It says or other data source. More than 99 times out of 100, it'll be. All right. But one thing that you can do, especially if you're using Link, you can connect, for example, to a spreadsheet. You can connect to there's ways of doing it, to even like a comma separated or a CSV file. There's other ways you can do it. That said, it's almost always going to be to a database. All right. It says, although you can hand code it, all right, it's generally considered the best practice to put it into a configuration file. The reason for that, as they mention here, is when you're testing it, you're going to be testing it on your own machine. But if you're working for a company, you're going to be moving it to a company server someplace. So it says you won't have to change the code for the app. You'll just have to change the connection string in the configuration file. All right. For ASP.NET Core MVC apps like we're building, it says typically you use the configuration file named appsettings.json. It's one of the things we looked at the beginning of this chapter. Notice it's a text file that uses JSON. So let's take a look at it, and then we'll jump back into this. This isn't that different from the way yours is going to look. All right. So they're defining the connection string right here. All right. And they're saying it's going to be called movie context. Yours will probably look just about identical to this. The database, as you'd guess, is the name of your database. This must be on one line. It's on two lines just because it's in a book, but you have to put it on one line. All right. I've already broken it up into two lines and had it not work. Now, the server is, again, from when we're over here, go back to view, SQL Server Object Explorer. All right. If you remember, we did this and we looked in here. All right. I think that's where the stuff even was. So when I look here, what is it? Local DB, MSSQL, local DB, etc. All right. That's what's going to end up basically going into your all or part of your connection string. The database, again, is what you're going to name the database. Now, since we didn't do this last time, all right, the system basically just put it into its own spot. If we do set up a connection string like this, we have more control because we can say exactly what tables we want in that database, which has got the name we wanted in there. All right. The trusted connection is equal to truth. That has to do with a bunch of internal stuff. What I've never used before is that last thing. Multiple active result sets equal true. Now, they may explain it in here, but I don't think I saw it in here. Maybe I just missed it. I don't know. But I think what they mean in here is when you are working with multiple tables and you are at least essentially doing work with multiple tables, all right, that you could have multiple result sets. Anytime you run a query on a table, you get back a result set. Since we're going to have more than one table, we could conceivably have more than one result set. I think that's what this means. All right, I'd have to go look it up, and I did not do so. All right, so they explain that in here. And before I jump into dependency injection, it is 101. So I'm going to give you till, let's just cut the difference, 112. I will come back at 112. I'm going to get a new water and we'll pick it up right there at that time. Does anybody have any questions on anything we've gone over thus far? All right, then I'll see you back at 112. All right, let me come back. Just trying to help a student. They're taking their first test today in the AWD 1000 class. So let me grab this, put my share back on. All right. Okay, so the next part of page 144 talked about dependency injection. And as it says right there, it does the equivalent of rather than building something into an object, it does the equivalent of passing it in as a parameter. So that's where the name comes from. It says whatever the object depends on is passed into it, or also known as injected into it. And it says this decouples the objects from its dependencies, and it makes it easier to test. And part of that reason is you've got control over what gets passed into it. Whereas if it was built into it itself, you'd have less control. So as it says here, the ASP.NET Core MVC uses this to pass context objects to controllers that need them. And in order to do that, you have to come in, and in that programmer CS file, you have to add something like this right here. Whoops. Well, that. All right. And then what happens is it passes to things like this is the context object that was defined up here. All right. And what that's going to do is it's going to pass in information that it needs as it needs it. All right. And if that doesn't make sense, I mean, again, with some of this stuff, you're going to have to take it on what's in the book. And chapter 12, which is one of the probably the hardest chapter in the book, they're going to go over this in a lot more detail. So again, the connection string contains the information to connect to the database. Typically, as it says, we store those configurations in the app settings. The dependency injection, as it says, make sure that the services, all right, whatever the object needs is passed into it rather than being hard-coded into it. All right. And then they explain that in here and how basically it's added through in there through one of these lambda expressions. Don't let lambda expressions throw you. We will be talking about those a little bit at the end of the chapter here, and we'll be talking about them as the semester goes on in more and more detail. All right. All right. The next part that's in here, the next few pages, we have covered this pretty much. There's not a lot of new stuff in here, except what they do is some of the commands I had you put in, they explain them in more detail than I did. All right. And the reason that I would just tell you what to type in and I didn't explain it is I didn't know we were going to have it here. And they talk about an up method and a down method, which we'll see in a moment. But I didn't know if you guys, I didn't want to put it so far over your heads that it made no sense. All right. So I figured we go through an easier example first as a class. And again, that was what I wanted us to do. So what they're saying here is you go into the package manager console window. All right. That PM that we saw, that you ran from the command line. All right. And it says here, if you try to work with a database before you've actually created it, all right, with that add migration line in the update database, you're going to get a message like this. Cannot open database movies requested by the login. You can't do it because there's no database yet. All right. So it says there the first command that you put in, and we did this one, is this add migrations. As it says, it creates a migration file in a folder named migrations. And you might say, well, we already have that in our project. That's because if you remember, we chose for that authorization and authentication, we chose in there individual accounts. And that's why it made the migration folder for us. All right. If we didn't choose that, if we chose none there, we'd have to go in basically and put this stuff, have it be added for us, for lack of better words. So as it says, if it doesn't previously exist, it's created the first time you do an add migration command. The migration, hopefully this makes a little sense to you, or if nothing else, maybe a little more sense to you than it did the other day. As it says, it contains the code for doing your CRUD operations. More specifically, it has an up method and it has a down method. The up method implements the migration. The down method rolls back a migration. And when you do that update database command, all right, that's actually executing the up method that's in here. All right, and that basically is, again, going to allow you to do your CRUD operations. And that's what they say in here. You can read it yourselves. Like I said, I don't want to sit and read to you. Again, they mention, hey, if you don't get it, there's going to be a lot more in chapter 12. And this is kind of important. I've mentioned to you that in the entire book, they're using Visual Studio, not Visual Studio Code. And what they mention is if you want to use VS Code for this, you'll have to do this differently. All right. Using command, I think that's command line integration or it's interpretation or something like that. I've never used it because I've never run this stuff using VS Code. So there's the package manager. All right. We talked about this stuff. They don't do a great job in here because they make it look like all this has got to be in double quotes, where I told you what had to be in double quotes and what didn't. Here's that up method that's right here. And again, that's setting your stuff up, no pun intended, for what we want to work with. All right. How to view your database once it's created. This is what I had you do. If you remember, we went to view and we went to SQL Server Object Explorer. We expanded that local DB one. Sometimes you get one or two of them that are named the same or darn close to one another. All right. And again, what we're going to have when we do this and we do it the way they're showing it in here is we will have the database. In this case, it would be the database named movies. All right. Okay. All right. So how to work with data. This is a few pages on LINQ. Remember, LINQ, they say language in integrated query. I've heard line integrated query. I've heard a lot of different stuff. But when this came out, this was trumpeted by Microsoft because you could use LINQ. All right. You could use LINQ like SQL, but you could use LINQ on non-SQL. In other words, you could use it on records. You could use it on arrays. You could use it on dictionaries, etc. And you can use it on databases, which is what we're doing here. All right. And it says we're going to talk about that and how to use the methods dbset and dbcontext in unison to help us do our CRUD operations. All right. Okay. So it says here there are two steps to using LINQ in EF Core. First, you build a query expression, then you execute it. That shouldn't be anything new. So let's look at some examples here. All right. These are some LINQ examples that are right here that are done with Lambda expressions. Before we look at those, and we will in about a minute, look at this chart here. You already know what where is. You know what order by is. When you use order by with LINQ, it now is one word. So you combine the order and the by into one word. I do believe, people always say, well, is this case sensitive? It's not supposed to be, but I always put it using what they show here. In other words, I don't put where in all uppercase or all lowercase. I put it the way they show it here. The good news is when you build these LINQ expressions, the IntelliSense should kick in. All right, but I believe it has to be in the caseness that's shown here. So you do where as a filtering mechanism, you do order by because you want something in ascending or descending order. All right. The first or default, notice what it says. So if you're looking through a list, all right, if you're looking through a list and you're looking for, there might be one match, there might be several matches. What first or default is it's going to just return the first existence of whatever it is you're looking for. And if there's nothing there, it'll return null. Now, this is important because I want you to understand the difference between first or default and the one that's in the other table with find. First or default, you can put any expression you want in here, not just the ID. You can search for anything that you want. When you use find, the only thing that it wants in there is an ID. So if you know that you want something and you have some kind of an idea what the ID is, find is what you'd want to use. All right. But if you don't know, all right, or if it's something that could return multiple things, you probably want to use the first or default. Finally, there's the to list. And believe it or not, I think we looked at that in ours. I think that's what, I'm pretty sure that's what we used when we returned all the quotes. All right. So you look in here and yeah, this is all new stuff. All right. Or virtually it's new stuff. And I went and looked online, and a lot of the stuff that's online here for learning, just to show you quickly what I did. I said using link with ASP.NET MVC core. This is one of the things I looked up before class today. And a lot of the stuff that was in here, you can see I've hit on some of these. Not all of them, but a lot of them. 2010, all right? 2018, which is 5 years old already. This isn't bad. 2022, 2021, but there were a lot of examples. And when I went out to YouTube to start looking at these, I was amazed at the number of things in here that were 5 or more years old. Just be leery when you're looking at that stuff. All right, be leery. And what I mean is some of that stuff that's in here, if it's more than 5 years old, it's going to be old, and it might, it might very well be, the reference might be wrong now. It might have changed since then. So let's look at how we use this. All right. Okay. So basically when you are writing something like this and you're using a lambda expression, what appears on the left-hand side of the equals and greater than sign, this is what's going to hold the result. This is what you want to have happen. So you want M to hold all the movie names and have them be listed. That's what M is. And the reason I'm telling you this is it can be a little bit confusing to look at this. But what appears on the left-hand side of the equal greater than is what the variable is basically that's going to hold the result of what's on the right. Hopefully that made at least a little bit of sense to you. But again, you're going to have to look at a lot of examples. All right. Are you going to have to write a lot of this stuff? You'll have to write some of it. All right. And as we take a look in there, there's a little bit more. So again, they talk about the first or default, and they talk about a few other things that are in here as well. All right. I'm giving you my take on this because I know people tell me I get sick of listening to you read out of the book or whatever. I don't want to read out of the book. All right. So inserting, updating, and deleting data. As it says, there's the three methods of the DB set are shown in here. Well, that's true. All right. But what I want you to get out of this, other than the context.movies, well, really, if you remember from last year when we were working in Mongo, we would create something and then we would call the save changes. So there is at least some similarity between the SQL Server SQL and the MongoDB NoSQL that we did last semester. And the ideas are similar to one another. So you are going to be allowed to do these operations, and then you want to make sure after you do them, you do a save changes. You'll notice here with these three methods that the equivalent of a select or a list isn't here because they're not changing anything. That's just displaying information. So you wouldn't call a save changes. So the only three methods that are shown here of this DB set class are methods that can conceivably or really should be changing the actual database. So again, it's the C, the U, and the D of CRUD, not the R is what I'm saying. All right. And they're showing that in here. Some of this isn't going to make a lot of sense until we start working with it. All right. For example, they show you this one. Okay. And what is that? That's a link statement with an order by and a lambda in it. And what happens is that gets converted or generated into this. This is actually a great example if you want to see how you're going. This is what you put in, and this is basically what gets created by the system, for lack of better words. All right. And when you do this stuff, they mention you can add a logging setting to the app.json file. All right. Why would you want to do that? Because you can provide information. So if something doesn't work, all right, you can provide information in there. All right. So again, I think we've covered most of it that's in here. All right. I'm not trying to screw you out of anything, but I'm also don't want to sit and read to you. So now they get into the app itself, and they're going to start talking about the changes that are made. This is much more complex, the changes they make into the home controller, and eventually when they add and put in the movie controller, than what we did. All right. So it says, now you learn how to code the controllers and views used by the movie list app. All right. Now it also says that the code they display first isn't exactly the same stuff as they showed at the beginning, because they're going to be adding to it as they go on. All right, so the first thing is the home controller. And as it says, notice it starts with a private property named context of the movie context type. So you're making a variable out of something that you've already created. So you're able to use it all over the place. Let's take a look at what's in there. All right. There's your home controller. This isn't that different from some of the stuff that we looked at. But again, what we did when we created it was typically we didn't choose empty. All right. We chose, one of the other options where a lot of the stuff was built in for us. All right. There's nothing wrong with doing that at all, but it's important that you realize what's going on behind the scenes, for lack of better words. All right. Now, when you look in here, this is actually fairly simple. And what I mean is, what are they doing here? Well, they're setting up the table. These are your headings. And for your data, that it's using that at command that we talked about earlier. All right. And it's just grabbing the information. So that's grabbing the information from the model fields. All right. All right. Then they go in again. Now they add the movie controller. All right. And again, I want to make sure that you all understand this. So I'm going to jump back out of here just for a second. But like I said, tomorrow when we do this, and tomorrow when we do these, I'm going to follow their instructions. What I'm saying is this. In chapters 2 and 3, when you are doing the homework, they're assuming you haven't gone through chapter 4 yet. So I'm going to follow what they say. So the stuff we do tomorrow will be probably more reminiscent of what we did yesterday, where some of it will be automated for us. The reason that on Monday, I wanted to try to build this one here from scratch so you could see it, and that would be more like what we're looking at right now. All right. So it says the movie controller has 3 action methods: add, edit, and delete. In addition, the edit and the delete are overloaded. Why? So you can use the form with both of them. All right. So it says for a GET request, both the add and the delete actions set a view bag named action and pass a movie object. But the add passes an empty object. Why? Because what you want to have show on the screen when you're adding is an empty form. All right. On the other hand, edit passes a movie object that's going to need an ID, so it knows to fill that form up with the data for that particular ID. And that's what they're saying in here. All right. It says to be able to use the same view as the edit action, the edit passes edit as the first option. All right. So you're going to make sure that it's displaying the same thing. But as you'll see when you look in here, notice here what it's saying down here. If the ID is 0, it's an add because it's a new one. If it's not 0, you're attempting to do an edit. All right. It is still possible that if I have 10 movies, if I put in there for a movie ID, if I put 3,000 in there, it's not going to find it, but it's going to attempt to do an edit rather than do an add. And that's what I want to get across to you. All right. And again, if you have not read the chapter, you're going to have to read it and take a look at this. They're doing a lot better job probably explaining the stuff that in here than I'm doing. All right. I'm just trying to go over it, like I said, and just get it where you're, for lack of better words, you're in the mode where it's starting to make some sense to you. All right. Then next, as it says here, the next thing they're going to do is they're going to show the code for the movie edit view. Take a look at that. All right. Remember what that view bag is. We talked about this before. You can put anything you want into a view bag. All right. You can create any property in there you want. It can have any value you want. But the idea behind using this is it is a way that you can pass information around. If you remember in the future value in there, and we pass the actual future value, we pass those at the beginning. Okay. All right. So in here again, what are they doing? Well, they're setting up a form, right? When you see ASP stuff in here, that's basically you're getting information. Typically, you're going to be getting that information from a table. All right. And I should say, from a database. All right. So as it says in here, the edit view uses the movie object as the model and it binds the HTML to it. All right. It uses that view bag property we already talked about. The ID, as it says, is bound to a hidden field. Why is it bound to a hidden field? You don't want to show it. We've talked about this before when we ran stuff like this in the AWD1100 class. If we ever took the field that was a primary key or the ID, what we did was either we made it, if it was going to be a text box, we made it read only, or even better, we made it a label. Here they're just choosing to make it hidden, meaning they're not even going to show it. All right. So next, when an empty movie object is passed to the add, the text boxes are blank. All right. With the edit, again, there should be information in there, and that's what they're talking about. As it says, it uses tag helpers to specify the action, so what you want to have done. And as they mention in there, it doesn't mention a controller. So what that means is you want to have the action done on the current controller. You're already working with the movie controller, and that's where you want it to happen, so to speak. All right, and the cancel, typically when you cancel something, what you'll want to have happen is you'll want to go back to your home page. All right, so if you're in the middle of editing editing a movie and like, I don't mean to do that, you click cancel and you go back to your entire list of movies. That's pretty much what they're saying here. All right. The delete, which is typically the simplest. All right. As it says, it contains a form. That form doesn't have to show everything. All right. So it's going to be a lot smaller. The only thing you're typically going to care about is the ID. All right. It doesn't have to be the ID. No, there's different ways, again, that you can set this up. All right. But you say, yeah, well, I could make it the title. It's totally possible you could have two movies that have the same title. All right. That's possible. If you know the ID and you know what you're looking for, remember, you could always bring it up from the home page, or if you have a search, you could do a search and probably somehow from there be able to figure out what the ID is. So as it says here, the delete uses the movie object as the model, displays the properties, and it does allow you to confirm your deletion. So again, what it does, even though you are passing it the ID, it is then showing you the name of the movie. Now, in this example that we have, it's really, really simplistic. And what I mean by that is we don't have many movies in ours. There's only 3 that they put in. So it's, it'd be hard to screw it up and do the wrong one. Again, you'll notice here, the ID is bound to a hidden field. All right, so you're not showing it. Okay, again, we're using tag helpers, but not specifying the controller. So it's defaulting to the current controller, or in other words, the movie controller. And again, the cancel that's in there allows you to go back to your home page, the index of your home page. All right, now is where it gets really new. All right, we got about 15 pages left in the chapter or so. Because when they talk about related data, now they're talking about bringing in another table. All right. So it says now you learn to add another entity class and generate another database table. What should make sense to you right away when you hear that is, oh, we're creating another table. We're going to have to do another migration, because we are. All right. In addition, it says we're going to learn how to relate the new entity to the existing one. And there's different ways that this can be done. There's different levels onto which this can be done. And you're going to learn about some of it now. And again, as they say, a lot more in chapter 12. All right. So it says you can relate one entity to another by making one a property of the other. What the heck does that mean? Well, they're going to come in here and they're going to create a new class that's called genre. So this will be a new model class in there. And you'll notice it's pretty simple. It only has 2 fields in it, a genre ID, and it has a genre name. Now, take a quick look at the type for the genre ID. It is not an int. So what that means is the system will know this is the primary key, but it will not make it an identity field, which you wouldn't want anyway because it's a string. All right. Also, we are, as a safety mechanism, basically, we are taking both these fields again because they are now both reference fields, and we are initializing them to the empty string, to string.empty. That's the same thing as double quote, double quote. Then notice after we do that, we go back to our movie class, and it assumes this stuff is still in there. It's just not repeating it. And then we add this. So what we're doing is we're adding a genre object. We are adding a genre object now as part of the movie class. All right. And that's okay, fine. And to take it even a step further, all right, we can come in here and we can say, okay, that this is a foreign key. Now, we don't say in there foreign key. We don't say that. All right, we don't say it. But the system is going to be smart enough to figure it out in a few different ways, which we're going to get to in a moment. But what I want you to see in here too, when we start looking at some of this stuff, all right, is this can lead to problems. Because if it is empty, which it can be, when it does some of the another decorator that we oftentimes put in here that looks like this, validate never, which means that even if there's nothing in there, let it go through and don't flag it as an error. So if for some reason there was a mismatch, all right, that there was a genre problem in our movie, all right, don't make the program blow up. In lack of better words, that's what it's saying. All right. Now going back here, they explain in more detail than I just did of what's happening here. They go through each one. So again, the first example is the genre class with the 2 properties, the ID and the name. The second example is the movie class and how they're bringing in genre type as a new property. All right. Then in the third example, they're showing how you bring it in with the primary, or the foreign key rather, and how that's done. As I mentioned, it says here, when you use the foreign key property, the model view controller sometimes, as it says, will perform unexpected or unwanted validation. That's why they're putting that validate never decorator into that. That doesn't say that we don't want to validate it here, but we're saying is we don't want to validate it in here. All right. And again, I've said this umpteen times. If you're not going to take the time to read the chapter, please take the time to look at the code examples and the descriptions that are underneath them. All right. I think you're hurting yourself if you're not reading the chapter. Okay. Then, as it says, how to update the DB context class and the seed data. We're going to look at this, but first let's look at this. Notice what we're putting in here. This is going to be in the new migration that we're going to do. And these are the genres. So the ID A for action, C for comedy, etc. All right. Now, if you decided that at a later time, you either wanted to remove a genre because you weren't using it, or you wanted to add a new genre, you'd again have to do another migration. But this example does a fairly good job of showing, again, remember the ID was of type string. All right, so how we have to put it in here. Okay, and some of this stuff that's in here, all I can tell you, I believe that what they're showing in here, this is basically like C# code. All right, and since these are strings, okay, they are put in double quotes. With the SQL Server syntax, if we go in like we did yesterday, I don't know if I still have that here, that required single quotes. All right. And you say, well, that stinks. Yeah, it does, but that's just the way that it's set up. So what's shown here in this example in yellow is what they're adding in here that's new. Now, they're adding in the context class. What they're seeding is here. Then they're going back to their 3 movies. All right, they're going back and they're taking each movie. This is the same stuff it had before, Casablanca, Wonder Woman, and Moonstruck, but they are going back and adding the genre ID. Hopefully, one thing you can see out of this, hopefully, is the fact that, boy, it's a good idea to try to have your database and the tables set up before you put any data into them. Because, imagine what a pain in the butt this would be if we had 1,000 records in here and now we had to go back and add genre IDs. We put them in the old way at the beginning. We didn't have the genre ID. All right, now we do. The key takeaway, though, is now this in here has genre ID D, A, and R, right? Well, when we did it to begin with, we were using the words. We were using drama, we were using action, and we were using rom-com. Much easier to put it in like this, having a single letter. You don't have to worry then, as long as you know what that letter stands for, you don't have to worry, what if you misspelled comedy? What if you put drama instead of drama, or you left an R out of horror, etc. So they say here, when you add new entities to the app, you also add them to your DB context and DB set class. And it's not mandatory, but again, it makes total sense here to seed all this stuff. All right, and run a new migration. And as mentioned, then it uses the updated context class and it seeds the data to change the database. Now, again, that is explained. Come on, don't do this. There we go. It explains it probably more than I just did in here. I'm just kind of giving you the picture of what's going on. And again, I'm trying not to confuse you. Right? All right. So again, then you're going to do your migration. As it says, after you update, you need to update the database to add the table and to put the new initial data in, all right, that has the genre IDs. To do that, it says you follow this procedure. All right. Select tools, new get package manager console. That's not new. All right. You type add migration genre. And again, what you put in there is up to you. All right. Remember when we did the add migration, that's the name it's going to be. All right. I believe in running all this stuff together. All right. So I would have said add migration. And like I said, I believe one of these, I don't remember which one has to be in double quotes. It's the one I showed you the other day. All right. You can try putting it in without double quotes, but if it's expecting them, of course, it's going to fail. And now it's showing what it did in here. All right. In other words, it added this. It added the genre ID into the movies table. All right. And it added the new genres table. And it's got the values in there. All right. So again, that is explained in more depth in breadth of coverage here. All right, than I just gave you. With again, the caveat that they always put in, hey, you'll learn more about this in chapter 12. All right. All right. How to select related data and display it on the movie page. As it says, now we're ready to be able to actually go in and possibly change things. So we're ready to run CRUD, especially again, the C, the U, and the D. All right. It says the figure on the next page shows how to add each movie's genre to the table. So let's take a look at that. All right. So it says to include the genre. All right. And then, so what are we doing in here? We are updating the home controller because the home controller has to know now that it's going to be using that genre. All right. And we are adding it in here. All right. And notice we're adding the name, not the ID. All right. So when we actually run this, even though we're pulling that information out from a different table, all right, we're storing only in our table. We, in the movies table, we're only storing the ID from the genre table, not the actual genre name. All right. That's not that different from the way we've done things in the past when we've worked with databases. All right. How to display related data on the add and edit pages. Well, again, when we come in here, there are going to be changes that are going to have to be made. All right. We want to make sure again that we're showing the name here. All right. And here. I'm hoping that this is going to make a lot more sense when we see it in action and we're doing it ourselves. All right. All right. Two more things that are in this chapter here. All right. The first one is talks about user-friendly URLs. And again, that's the act of going in and taking our URL and making sure that it's all lowercase. And it's also adding a trailing slash at the end. In order to do both of those, as they show on the next page, what you're doing is in your program.cs file, you are adding some options. This is the first time we've looked at anything that has to do with routing. Routing's coming up. We're going to be working with routing exclusively and extensively in chapter 6. But as you can see, this says our URLs should be lowercase, and we should have, the slash on the end. So instead of looking the way it did earlier, where movie and add had a capital M and a capital A, now it takes lowercase. All right. And again, the reason for that is historically, that's how people do it. It's considered, as it says here, it's considered good practice. All right. So they're explaining in here exactly what you're doing, but basically it's what I just told you. All right. All right. And the last thing that's in here talks about adding a slug. They define a slug here as a descriptive section that comes at the end of a URL, often after the sections are used to look up data, such as a primary key or a date. It could be a title. It could be a name. You can put what you want in there, but as it says, putting that onto the URL makes it easier for the user. They say to predict the content. I don't like the way they're putting that. I say it makes it easier that it's showing up in the URL, really at the end of the URL, it's showing you can compare that with what actually gets returned to see if it's returning what you want it to return. All right. So it says to do that, you add for the slug, basically it says you add a segment named slug followed by a question mark. That should look pretty familiar to you because when you look at this slug in many ways, it sounds a lot like the query string that we worked with when we were in the AWD1000 class. And in some ways, at least, that's pretty much what it is. All right. So they do mention here after you add an optional parameter named slug to your routing, you can add a read-only property named slug to the movie class and put in there what you want to put into it. As they show right here, all right, slug question mark. Notice ID and slug both have question marks. So what we get is something like this. So what they're putting in here is both into that slug. They are basically putting in the name of the movie with a hyphen, and they're putting in the year for the movie. All right. Now, it doesn't show with a question mark like we've seen, with a regular URL, but that's the way that it's put in here. So again, it's defined, as you can see there, as being a descriptive section at the end of a URL. All right. Notice you add it by adding an optional parameter named slug to the default route. Believe it or not, that's it for the chapter. All right. Now, I sprung that on you today as far as what we're doing tomorrow. I want to say it one more time. No, I'm not trying to waste your time. So tomorrow, all right, we will first go into projects and we will do projects 2.1 and 3.1. You will be responsible yourselves for creating project 2.2. So tomorrow when we start, all right, we will be creating the price quote app. Then we will be styling the price quote app. All right, I'll do it myself. I'll go back and take a look at, I've got the answer key, and I'll see how they've done it and see if their styling looks better than mine. I'm sure it'll look quite a bit different. All right, so we'll do that first. Then when we get done with that, we will come up and we will do 3.1. Let's just take a real quick look here at what we'll be doing. Please read this introduction here. It's a couple pages. All right, so read that. And then we're going to come in and do this. So it says we're going to create the home page for the app with the nav bar, as it says, and some menu options that are up here that we're going to be using for later assignments. All right, we'll set this up basically using Bootstrap. All right, and not much to do in here. It's all right here. Create an app based on the MVC template, edit the code provided by the template to create a home page that looks like what's shown above. Then use a razor layout to store the elements that are common to all pages, such as the nav bar and the footer. All right, use Bootstrap classes. I'm going to try to make it look like this one does, for lack of better words, including the color here. All right, and what is that blue? I don't remember. That's not success, is green. Primary, I believe. So that'll be primary, and the text color will be white. On here, these links, I don't know if they made them primary or not. I'll take a look at it later. All right, and we'll mark, as it says, all navigation bars items as active. All right, and then for the other one, again, 2.1 and 3.1. Again, just read this little bit that's in here. These are the guidelines. I will look. It says if your instructor doesn't supply a starting point, start it from scratch or his project. I'll look before when I get off today. And if there's anything I have not provided for you, I will send it to you. All right. If you're doing it with a time limit, no. Feel free to copy and paste code from the book apps or the projects. If you want, you can do that. It's not going to be copy and paste unless you've got a PDF copy. It's funny because I contacted the publisher yesterday, and even though you can buy from Muroc a PDF, the guy told me they don't carry the PDFs. They do it through another company, so he couldn't provide me a PDF, which I didn't like, but that's the way it is. So when creating the file names, use the convention specified by the instructor. It says otherwise store the code in a folder, name first, last app, no. Let's just, when we are doing this, let's have a folder that if we don't have one already, that's called projects. And when we're working on the first one, we'll call it project 2-1. All right. That'll be the name of the actual folder that we're using. This is a price quote app. We'll name all that stuff tomorrow. Like I said, I don't think this is going to take very long. All right, but we'll do 2-1 where we do the price quote. Already talked about this the other day. We'll even do some validating, even if they don't ask for it yet. All right, so that if it's not numeric, that we'll be able to handle it. And I don't know if they give you totals in here. It says the discount percent must be 0 to 100. We'll do some validation is what I'm telling you. We're going to skip this one. You're going to do that one yourselves. And we'll do this one. So I'm going to start tomorrow. Like I said, I'll start by doing these two. We'll look at all of the specifications in here. You'll notice how this is responsive. Since we're using Bootstrap, it should be anyway. Not a lot of specs. They're all on one page here for 3.1, and they're all on one page here for 2.1. We'll do that first of all. When we get done, then we'll jump into this one and we'll do this. If it's like today and it takes till 2 o'clock, we're done at 2 o'clock. All right. I want to make sure I would recommend if you want. All right. Since I'm asking, remember, I gave you this at the beginning of class, that now I'm going to expect on Sunday, we'll have almost all the homework done tomorrow and labs other than one, but you'll still have to do those written tests. On Monday, I'm saying this, 3 out of the 4 of you in this class are online listening now. On Monday, I am going to read off the answers. All right. I am going to read off the answers for the chapter 1, the chapter 2, and the chapter 3 written test. Since I'm going to read them off, if you don't have it turned in by Monday, you get a 0. There's nothing I can really do about that. Also, just so you know, the lecture I do tomorrow, since I'm actually doing some of the homework and the ones that I'm doing Monday, all right, I have to do a little bit of tweaking. I'm going to make those private videos. I make all my stuff public. Well, these are going to be private because I don't want to share that with Evan's people, because Evan may or may not be doing it like that. That's his call. It's not my call. All right. Any questions on anything that we've gone over today on chapter 4 or on the updated homework or on what we're going to be doing tomorrow? Anybody? All right, so you know what we'll do tomorrow. Friday will be a lab day. I will start next Monday by reading the answers for the chapters 1, 2, and 3 written test. And then last thing, then on Monday, we will come in. I don't remember which one this is. It's not that one, it's this one. On Monday, we will come in then after we go through that, and we will build this contact manager app as a class. All right. I'm going to use the same records that they have: Dolores Del Rio, Efren Herrera, and Mary Ellen Walton. So I'm going to use that for my data, just so you know. All right. If you have no other questions, I will talk to you tomorrow at 12:05. See you then.